And that's actually Zob very good at doing.
Yeah.
And again, so that communication idea, the idea around business and being able to apply it, super, super important. And in your undergrad, that's kind of an idea that you need to keep in your mind, that these skills, it doesn't matter that you're good at math. Of course, it matters if you're good at math, but that you need to be able to give context and let people kind of understand why these numbers are important.
Yeah.
What do they mean in the world?
Yeah.
You can do all the maths you want, but if it's not actually making a difference in the world, then what is your job?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a really interesting point in that, as you said, like you start your actuarial degree and it's very technical, right? I remember saying to my sister, she's in a sort of in the humanities space, and she would, write all these essays or whatever. And I would always be like, that's incredible, because we never really wrote essays, you don't really write written answers until you get sort of later on in your degree. Yes. And everything was calculation based. Yes. And so often I was like, I actually have no idea what I'm doing. I can do it, but I'm like, what are the ramifications of this? And now being in the academic space and teaching, I always say to my students, okay, like you've done the calculation, fabulous. Like it's beautiful, but what does it mean? Like what is the decision that you're making based on this? And that's actually a really difficult skill, because you also don't have exposure to sort of the financial world, which is for me, most of my learning as a sort of an analyst becoming an actuary was actually in the workspace. To be like, oh, okay, this is what you mean when you price, this is what a margin is. This is what, how we account for expenses and that sort of thing. And so I think when you start with that technical base, you just don't have that perspective.
Yes.
But you need those technical skills in order to apply them. So it's kind of like a chicken and egg kind of situation, because like you can't apply unless you understand the calculation. Yes. But then you're doing the calculation, you're like, well, where does this apply? Exactly. So it's a bit of like a strange way of going about it, but you have to have that technical skill.
Yeah, it's a way of basically explaining in logic. Like maths is just logic in symbols. We basically made a language that is like fundamentally based on logic, of like, how do you build a logical argument to arrive at an answer?
Yeah.
But I mean, I write to my students like papers where they haven't explained things of like, who cares? Like, who cares that the answer's 10? Yeah. Like, this is not, you need to understand the context. And this is also so for those thinking about going around doing the actuarial sort of path, I would suggest that if you are a person that has lots of interests and wants to know about the world and like wants to solve problems, this is perfect. So I mean, you will probably have lots of guests quoting the Frank Reddington or like, an actuary is just an actuary is not an actuary.
Exactly. Exactly.
Just because you can do the maths, you've passed the exams, does not make you an actuary.
Exactly.
Being an actuary is about being able to apply them and now solve problems in the world. Like that is the big thing around it. And so talking on the maths, I guess, so ChatGPT kind of brushes over a lot of things of just how difficult this path is as well.
Yeah.
So if you think, yes, get a university degree. That's at least 3 years if you don't fail anything. It's generally recommended you do an honors, because otherwise you have to do more exams by yourself.
Well, while you're working, which is obviously a difficult, I mean, to juggle work and study is not ideal.
So you mentioned earlier, so I often, when I'm telling people, what it actually does, or I tell them kind of around the CA route, they're a bit more familiar with that.
Yeah.
CAs have 2 board exams.
Yeah.
We technically have 13, excluding additional exams that you write in workshops. That eventually you get to a point, because you've written so many exams, that you're like, oh, but this is an easier exam. Like,
exactly.
It's an 8-hour like one of your workshops around modeling that we'll get into in your sort of normative skills is that you have a full day, 8-hour exam essentially, that you are building a model and documenting a model. But we don't really count that as part of the actual.
Yeah, I know.
But it's not like a core exam.
Exactly.
It's 13. So at most universities, so now this is going from your 3 A100 levels, which talk on statistics, economics, and finance.
Yes.
Your A200 levels, another 4, which is financial mathematics, risk modeling and survival analysis, contingencies, and loss reserving and financial engineering, which we lecture.
Yeah.
So you've now gone up to 7 that you will be doing in your undergrad degree that you can generally exempt from if you've done well enough.
At a university level, then you don't have to write the board exam post the university qualification.
Exactly.
Got you.
So already 7 exams that you hopefully will get by the end of your university degree. Then we add on, there is a communication subject that's often offered, so it's sometimes offered at undergrad level, sometimes at honors.
Depending on the university.
So this is now in 200 level.
Yes.
It's called communications, basically around how do you take all of these principles, how do you explain inflation to your grandmother?
Yeah.
How do you explain her retirement product, her health product in an email, a letter, a PowerPoint presentation? Yes. So starting to bring in this idea that context is important. Now, I've skipped over in 100. which for those wanting to do this actuarial journey outside of a university process, so writing it alone.
Yes.
Because you can also, some degrees, I think it's if you have like a BSc or a BCom, sometimes are equivalent. If you are doing it outside of an actuarial sort of university or program, then you will have to do an N100, which is an additional like 13 to 15 hours. And that is basically, it comprises of 3 modules where you will be going through like certain elements of what an actuary is, just to kind of give you an introduction.
Which you would have naturally got at a university setting, but because you didn't start out that way, you need that kind of background.
Exactly. And so you're kind of exempted from that if you do an actuarial degree at one of the accredited universities, which we have a couple in the country. So Tufts, Wits, UCT, Stellies, Potch, and I think there's UJ is now.
UJ go on, yes.
So there's a couple of now. That doesn't mean that a lot of people get through it. So.
100%. And before we move on from that, just speak to like almost the computer component of those technical subjects. Because yes, they're technical and there's a written aspect, but because actuaries, obviously, we use modeling. And when I say modeling, it means that you're creating a mathematical sort of mechanism to emulate reality in order to see what will happen. So it's important to also have that like computer literacy.
Yes.
So all of those technical subjects that you're talking about also have a computer aspect to the examination and the exemption. So just speak to that and the importance of that.
So this is something, I mean, we've seen kind of develop as the world has developed, right? So
which is important, right? We need to stay up to date.
So, and the thing about being an actuary is often, so when you get to the professionalism kind of aspects of it, they talk about this idea that you need to stay relevant. You need to make sure that your knowledge is relevant to the world.
Yes.
Otherwise, like what happens if legislation has changed?
Yes, exactly.
And so computers have become a thing. So actuarial students and those unfamiliar, we often talk about orange books. So,
oh my word. And some people talk to, I had someone talk to me the other day and say the golden book. And I was like, what? The golden book? I was like, it's clearly orange.
I'm colorblind. It's definitely orange. And so this orange book is essentially like you given it in your first year as an actuarial science student, and it contains all your important formulae. It has life and mortality tables.
Yeah.
But that is a very, I find, like an old way of thinking about actuarial science. When actuaries used to sit behind desks, we didn't have like Excel. Excel wasn't a thing.
Yeah,
like, you have punch cards and like...
I'm a word.
Yeah, pre my time. And so, but actuaries had to evolve, right? That's why we have calculators. So then calculators came and that sped up the process. And then we started with computers. And now in order to stay relevant, an actuary is not going to be doing... very unlikely. I think I've used integrals maybe once in my professional career post-university.
Yeah. My integration is really rusty, I must be honest with you.
But then it's because you don't need to use them, because a lot of the tools or the models already built, but they're built on computers.
Yeah.
Because we now dealing in the information age, tons of data available about policyholders,
big data,
the bank, about your sort of who you're lending to. And so you need to be computer literate.
Yeah.
So generally in the actuarial exams, that's kind of 2 ways that you do it. So partially through Excel.
Yeah.
And you will find a lot of components. So lots of these A-level exams are now being split into 2 parts. So your one part around sort of a written paper, generally 2 to 3 hours.
Okay.
And then a computer part, also 2 to 3 hours. And that computer part, be it on Excel or sometimes coded in R, being able to interpret R as a way to start. Actuaries are now also having to take in programming skills.
Yes.
I think of an actuary as like a financial sort of builder. You have lots of tools in your toolbox, your actuarial toolbox, and you need to constantly be adding them and like taking out the integral hammer and like clean.
No, 100%.
Because they all kind of form part of the actuarial skill set. Isn't to say that you can only do one thing. You need to constantly be evolving and learning new things.
Yeah.
And this is a way that we're starting, the profession is starting to get actuaries to try and think about the idea that you will spend most of your professional life on a computer.
Yeah.
Like you can't get away from that.
Yeah.
And you have to start becoming tech literate.
Yeah.
In terms of how do I get from this computer what I know in my brain.
Yes.
Or there's a financial mathematical model that I now need to code or build into Excel. How do I do that?
And yet it's still so important to understand the theory, because I mean, there is also the risk of having a model that's like a black box. We're like, it does something, what it does, you have no idea. And then you use the outputs and you're just like, I hope they're right. Exactly. So that technical emphasis is still so important to be like, I know what the model is doing. It does it better than a calculator could do it, or I could do it on paper, but I still understand the mechanism of what's playing out. And then I can make decisions based on that. So it's so important to understand the theory.
Yes. And then, so even sort of the rise of I mean, we say artificial intelligence, and I think most people more mean sort of machine learning of like, how do we get machines to learn kind of by themselves?
And make connections.
And make connections. But with that often comes an idea of machines don't necessarily learn how humans do. So their results are not always intuitive.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we've seen this in the regulatory space, like current regulations around sort of the numbers that actuaries are providing for your pension funds or a life insurer around their reserves. You're not allowed to use a lot of machine learning models because they are non-intuitive. They are these black boxes. And so, yes, actuaries have to upskill. So, for example, when I've prompted ChatGPT now, yes, I use it as sort of a framework, but you kind of need to develop the skill that you can't take these numbers from face value. Similar to who cares?
Yeah.
How do I know?
It's like that elements of oversight.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it will use ChatGPT to kind of, it's almost like Wikipedia, like a concise Wikipedia. It'll give you a broad way of like, okay, this is the general structure of this information that I need. And now I at least kind of have the words that I can use to go and Google further into each point to check its validity.
Okay.
And so I will then go and use it as a framework and then go and do my own research and sort of revise what GPT has given to me.
Fantastic.
Because there are a lot of issues. Yeah. And as actuaries, we have to be very careful against is kind of this overconfidence in incorrectness, is that we just take things as given. And again, back to this professionalism idea of, if you are with a client and you say, oh, well, the answer's 500, and they say, oh, well, how did you arrive there? And you say, well, that's what the model said. You have not done your job as an actuary.
100%. The model's actually done the job. You haven't done much. All you've done is literally stated what the model says.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, why are you getting paid?
Yeah.
That is not an actuary. That does not make an actuary. An actuary is there to explain the context, and I think actuaries sit very well between technical subjects and communicating to various stakeholders.
Yeah.
So we are there. We don't necessarily have to be subject matter expertise. So we've chatted about the A100 levels where you're looking at statistics, finance, economics.
Yes.
And you're not becoming an economist, a statistician, or a accountant.
Yeah.
But you can talk to each of these professions, get answers from them, collate them into a coherent argument, and then present them to multiple stakeholders.
Yes, agree.
And that is the goal of your actuarial journey, is to be able to do that across, be it a small subject matter expertise in terms of like a life, sort of
like
life
emphasis kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or across any sort of technical, as we sort of see actuaries moving into wider fields.
Exactly.
Data analytics, banking, these kind of ideas of that the role of an actuary is still the same. It's just the technical bit or who you're communicating to changes. But your role as an actuary is relatively the same.
Yeah. So I think, we've spoken about, you start very technical. Once you have these technical skills, you move on to like the interpretation of them and the application of them. So now let's say you finished your 3-year degree, 1-year honors.
Yes.
And you're now in the workplace and you've done let's just say you've done your fellowship exam, best case scenario. You're now doing this work-based learning. You said there's also exams that come with that. And those exams are generally like to do with professionalism. There is one on modeling and that model documentation. Let's just quickly touch on that and sort of how are those different? Why aren't those as part of the degree? Like, why is it that they're positioned at the end?
Oh, yes. Yeah, very good point. So following your honors, so in honors you're doing now your A300 level, so that's the big subject for actuarial risk management.
Yes.
Very large. And
that's actually known as the beast.
Yes. And that is kind of the start of that linking between the two worlds. So you're now taking your technical undergrad and the professionalism kind of business aspects and trying to merge them, and then you move into the working world where you now have to do this like work-based learning. You have to become a professional, get work experience, so on and so forth. So around that, so now we talk about the normative skills again. So now at your N300 level, you have 7 components to it.
Yes.
So the first one being work-based learning. So work-based learning is essentially sitting under a qualified actuary who will be supervising you. Yeah. You have to do at least 24 months under them. So for your AMASA, your associate membership for the Actuarial Society.
So that's above TASA.
Above TASA.
So it goes TASA, AMASA, and then FASA.
Exactly.
FASA is obviously the end goal, peak of the mountain.
Although at an AMASA level, you can also use the title actuary.
Okay, okay.
But you're not a fellow actuary.
Yeah, got you.
So work-based learning, N31101. So work-based learning, 24 months under a qualified actuary, you will have to do 20 skills that you write on. So then they're called development points.
Okay, yes, sir. Yeah.
And basically you are getting a little write-up of how have I demonstrated my ability in the workplace. So things around like communication, technical expertise, expert judgment, professionalism, you then also have to do 4 500 to 1,000 word review questions, which are basically
yes, I remember doing that. That was in